Hello and welcome to Murdock Escorted Tours Wednesday webinar series. We're grateful to have you viewing this video. My name is Wendy Fracchia, and I am the operations manager for the Escorted Tour Division with Morris Columbus Travel. And I am excited to be able to host these webinar series and get an opportunity to introduce some of our wonderful tour directors to you and share some wonderful information about the places that we visit on our tours, and hopefully give you some education, as well as maybe get you excited for a trip that you have coming up with us, or get you excited to sign up for one of those tours. So with that being said, I am very happy to introduce you and have Brother Joel Judd with us. Joel Judd has been guiding tours to the Holy Land since before I even began, and I've been with the division over 20 years. So I'm going to introduce you now and let Joel actually introduce himself to you and tell a little bit about his background and what he's going to be presenting to us today. So Joel, if you would just give us a little introduction, that would be great.
Thank you. I guess I could say that I have been directing tours for a number of years. I started in 1992, but it came about in a kind of an unusual way. I started teaching seminary back in the late 1960s. So that tells you I've been around for a while. And I had an opportunity in 1978 to visit the Holy Land. A friend of mine had told me that if I would take advantage of the opportunity we had to go to the Holy Land, it would change my life. And I kind of snickered at that, felt like it would probably be a great experience, but I don't think it would change my life. Well, I was wrong. I came back and I couldn't do anything but focus on everything that had to do with the Holy Land. The language, I started learning Hebrew. I studied geography and the history and the religious and even the political things associated with Israel and the Holy Land.
I think it's amazing that how at home people feel when they're over there. That was not something I was prepared for. You know, I was kind of like you. I went over kind of well, because I needed to for work my first time. It wasn't on the top of my list, but now that I've been there 6 or 7 times, certainly only a fraction of what you have, it really has become, it almost feels like a second home. I am so comfortable there.
Well, that's exactly the way I feel now. I feel like as I step off the plane, it feels like I'm back home. I'm familiar with the country. In fact, a few years ago, my wife and I took our 6 granddaughters and just gave them the kind of tour that I give groups. And my grandkids said, "What happened to you? When you step off the plane, you change into a different person." I said, "That's because I know this place and I love this place and I love to share what I've learned about it and my love for it." So that's
I'm sure that's what makes you such a wonderful director, and we are lucky to get to work with you. I'm excited for your presentation today, Joel. Tell us what you're going to be sharing with us.
Well, let me just give you a little background. I was invited after my intense desire to learn everything I could. I was invited to teach at the BYU Jerusalem Center in 1989. And I spent a year there with my family teaching students on 3 separate semesters, actually. And when I finished with that, I was so intrigued with the impact that kind of an experience that the students had. You could just see the change come over them because of their experience. And I wanted to come home and continue to be involved and give older people an opportunity. I'm talking about those who had finished school and were in their careers and beyond. And so I began to work in that direction. In 1992, I directed my first tour. And then ever since, I've been directing tours to the Holy Land and Egypt and Jordan as well. And
which I think, can also be called Holy Lands.
That they all have a connection, and more so than we even would realize unless we did some study about it. And I just loved it. And over the years, I've refined the tours that I direct because I write my own itineraries. And I refine them to the point where I feel very comfortable, and the people seem to be getting a great deal out of it. They love it. I've run into people over the years. Every time I see them, they will say things like, I never had a day where I didn't think about that experience in the Holy Land.
Wow.
And that just gave me some impetus to, you know what, I needed to continue to contribute. And so I love doing it. It's a hobby. It's not work. It's what I love to do.
But at the same time, it's the hardest work you do.
It is the hardest work I do. When I go 18 hours a day, 7 days a week while I'm directing these tours, it's okay. I get up ready to go for the day, as does my wife, and we have a great time. We love it. She's a soloist, and she also helps me teach and direct, and it's a fun time for us. So we love it.
Great.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is share.
Yeah, let me turn the screen over to you so you can share your presentation, and then
Okay, I have it now. What I'd like to do is share a little bit about what we do on a tour. And Wendy has asked me to focus on what we have celebrated and talked about and learned about this past 2 weeks, what I call the Week of Atoning Sacrifice, or Holy Week is what most Christians would call it, the events associated with the Savior's last Passover, and all those things associated with it. So I'm going to do that a little bit. I have a little introduction. Let me go to my screen, and we'll start this off. Using PowerPoint, I would just like to make a point or two about the land itself. It's always intrigued me that how such a small piece of land in the world can have such a tremendous impact upon the world and its history. And that is the case with the Holy Land. One of the smallest countries and one of the longest and most impactful histories is how I like to describe it. This little piece of land encircled in red on the map. And of course, the reason for that is the impact that the Savior has had upon mankind and will have for the eternities. All of that began in this small area. Another way to look at it is to look on a Middle East map. You can see that it's surrounded by the Mediterranean on the east, the west, and on the east, the Arabian Desert, and then to the north, Turkey and Lebanon, and to the south, Egypt. And it's just amazing that this little country has had such an impact. This is a satellite image of the same area, which is only 150 miles long, north to south, and 75 miles wide, east to west. In that area, you can see at the top of the picture the Dead Sea, or the Sea of Galilee, the Mediterranean on the left, and the Dead Sea to the right towards the bottom of the picture.
I love this picture. I've never seen this overview before. It is so detailed.
Yeah, and it is. You can see the Jordan River as it meanders from the north to the south feeds into the Dead Sea. And yet in this small area, 150 miles by 75 miles, it's a land of contrast. For example, along the Mediterranean coast, one of the great beaches in the world, I think, is right there at Tel Aviv. And then to the north, you have the Sea of Galilee, which is 700 feet below sea level. That's 700 feet below the Mediterranean sea level. And then further north, you have Mount Hermon, which is 9,200 feet high. Now look at the contrast between the Sea of Galilee and Mount Hermon. It's a big difference. And then to the south, you have the Dead Sea, which is 1,300 feet below sea level, which is the lowest dry land surface on the face of the earth. And then even further south, you have the Negev, where only maybe 1.5 inches of rain falls every year. It is truly a barren desert.
This is what people expect Israel to look like.
Pardon me?
This is what people expect Israel to look like.
And that's what I thought the first time I had gone there, and I was shocked that that was not the case in every place. And that's one of the things that I love to point out, and people are surprised at. And then you have the jewel of the Holy Land, the city of Jerusalem. And that's where we're going to focus a little bit today as we talk about the Week of Atoning Sacrifice. The first point I'd like to make is that there is a difference between reading the scriptures, which is what we ought to do, and I hope we all do it. It has a tremendous impact upon our lives. But there's something that happens when we are able to stand in the areas where we have studied and read about all of our lives. It changes our perspective. It deepens our understanding. It gives us an appreciation and a perspective that we do not get only by visiting the land firsthand. And that's what this picture depicts for me. This is our group that my wife and I just came back from in March. We were standing on the hills just north of Bethlehem. These are called the Shepherd's Fields. These are fields that have been used by shepherds for millennia, during the time of the Savior and even before, when Ruth and Boaz were married here and lived their lives out here and brought forth Obed, and then their grandson David, Jesse, and then David, their great-grandson. These are the same fields. And we would sit down on these rocks and talk about the birth of the Savior and have the feeling of this place, the sounds, the sights, the smells, what we hear. It's just amazing. And whenever you open the scriptures after an experience like this, that perspective comes back to you. It gives you a dimension that you've never had before. That's what I think is exciting.
Absolutely. Never read the scriptures the same.
That's really true. Another example is this one right here. It has to do with wells. You'll notice this gentleman, one of our group members, is sitting on the edge of this well. This well has been used for hundreds of years. You can see the trough next to it that still has water in it. And that's because there are sheep that still graze in this area, directed by shepherds. As we stand there and talk about the events that have taken place at wells, both in the Old and New Testaments, it's amazing. For instance, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob all had experiences with wells in their lives that transformed their lives. Mm-hmm. And so did a woman at Samaria who met with the Savior at a well. Wells are important places in the ancient Middle East, and they are today still. Okay, let's see if we can. Okay. One of the things I love to do is lead groups on short walks. In this particular picture, you're seeing our group from this last March. We're walking down the east side of the Mount of Olives on the way to a place called Bethpage. We're reliving the Savior's walk from Bethany to Jerusalem and back again each day during the last week of the Savior's life. As we walk, we talk about what the Savior would have seen, what he would have heard, what he would have felt, what he would have experienced on those walks. In the next picture, we're still on this walk down the east side of the Mount of Olives towards Bethany. And often just in the center of the picture towards the top is Bethany, where Mary, Martha, and Lazarus lived. We talk about that. And then off to the side, you see this little mound right there with my pointer. That is called the Herodium. And the Herodium, it was built by Herod and fortified there for one of his protective places that he would stay at. And that's where he was buried. It overlooks the city of Bethlehem that's also to the south. And it's kind of an irony, I think, that Herod was buried and is still, of course, not resurrected, but the Savior is resurrected. The object of his persecution and his attempt to take his life in killing the children in Bethlehem. It's just kind of irony that his burial place is so close to Bethlehem.
It's such an interesting place to visit as well.
Yeah, it really is. As we walk further down, I stop, and one of the members of our group took this picture. And I stopped here and asked our group members just to look around and describe what they see, if there's anything significant. And one of the group noticed this tree that's in the background here, and it's just breaking out in new leaves of the spring. And I asked them what kind of a tree it was. And one of them recognized that it was a fig tree. And I said, did anything ever take place in the Savior's ministry that had to do with fig trees? And of course, that's recorded in Matthew chapter 21. And we talked about it. And what was really fun is to look at it closely. Here's another fig tree on the same walk. And I happened to notice as I looked up into these trees, this tree and the leaves that were just coming out, I noticed a fig that was popping out as well, that follows the narrative that the Savior taught at that time. And I'm pointing at it right now. There's a close-up of it. And if you look closely, there's a fig that's just beginning to emerge as the leaves emerge on the trees. And of course, the Savior cursed the fig tree that he saw because it didn't have figs on it. But this is an indication. Here's early spring, and the figs are coming out with the leaves. I thought, what a great contrast and what a great lesson as we picked up there. That's the kind of things that we pick up as we go through an experience like this. As we continued our walk, we ended up at the place called Bethpage Church. And if you recall, this is where the Savior commanded a couple of his disciples to go find a donkey and to bring it back so that he could ride into the city triumphantly. And this is Harry Anderson's depiction of that. What's interesting about it is, and one of my group members mentioned this, that in the pictures that he'd ever seen of this depiction, this event, that he was coming into the city. And yet we don't stop to realize that he rode from Bethpage up the east side of the Mount of Olives and then down the west side, where he beheld the city for the first time on that triumphal entry. They still honor this event today. And here's an example, a picture I took off the internet of literally thousands of people that gather at the Bethpage Church and make this trek up the east side of Mount of Olives and into the city of Jerusalem, carrying palm branches and reenacting what took place on Jesus's triumphal entry at the first part of that last week of his life. And we were walking on those same pathways. Here we are, the same group, walking down now the west side of the Mount of Olives, and you can see in the foreground, rather the background, the city of Jerusalem with the gold dome of the rock as kind of a focal point and a reference point. And this is one of these great things that we do that's just so fun. And let me just tell you about what we do. Here we're standing at one of the viewpoints. This is a place called Dominus Flevit. And what I'm doing is pointing out the various places in the city of Jerusalem that had to do with the events of the Savior's last week in the city of Jerusalem. This is an example. We use a map that I pass out, and we trace the footsteps of the Savior from the last 48 hours of his life. And we pick out a site, and we find it on the map, and then we look out into the city and find those places. And we can literally point them out where they were and how far the Savior walked from one place to another. We start with Gethsemane and the upper room and talk about the Last Supper, the place where Jesus faced Caiaphas in the Jewish judgment that he faced after his arrest. and then throughout the whole thing. And as we stand there, we just outline his all events associated with the last week of his life. This is, of course, a picture of that has been painted pertaining to the Last Supper and breaking the bread and blessing it and passing it out as a remembrance of what he was yet to do in just a few hours. That took place in an area that we're fairly familiar with in the city of Jerusalem today. And we visit that place and talk about it. This is a picture of Gethsemane that we see today that exists at the base part of the Mount of Olives overlooking the city of Jerusalem. We visit here and walk through this area. This is the western face of the Mount of Olives. And those tall cypress trees that you see on the upper right mark the place of the Orson Hyde Garden. There's a garden there, 5.5 acres. It's dedicated to Orson Hyde's visit in 1841 under Joseph Smith's direction. And we go there and visit. But the reason I bring it up now is that that's just a little bit west up on the hill and a little north of where the Garden of Gethsemane is today. And we go there. And this is where we sit down in this quiet, sacred place and talk about the events of the Savior in the Garden of Gethsemane. It's a very special place, and there's a spirit there that it just you can't forget. And
it's so true.
Then, of course, the Savior was taken after facing Pilate and Herod Antipas. He was sentenced to death upon the cross and taken to Calvary, where he was placed upon the cross and, of course, crucified and voluntarily gave up his life. We can point these places out from that viewpoint, which is the point I want to make with this in just a minute that you'll see. Then, of course, we visit the Garden Tomb, which is a great candidate for nearby where the Savior was crucified and then buried and resurrected. And when we consider this place, I love this picture of the door. He is not here, for he is risen. It just reminds us of the most important event in the history of created man, as talked about in our last conference. All of these places just bring to life the scriptures in a powerful way. And of course, we can't think of one of the things I think is the most important is the Savior's appearance to the first person to ever behold his resurrected body. And that, of course, was Mary Magdalene. What an event that is. I'm going to drop back to this place here. This is a picture I took back in 2017. We had brought our 6 granddaughters to the Holy Land, and I gave them exactly the same tour that I give people in our groups. We were standing here at Dominus Flevit overlooking the city, and I had just used the map to walk through the events of the Savior's last week. And we pointed out each of those sites from that vantage point. And as we talked about it and talked about the importance of what took place in that last week, when I finished, I just stepped back. And as I stepped back, just to observe my granddaughters looking at that city and pondering and reflecting on what they just experienced and learned, I heard somebody start singing, "I stand all amazed at the love Jesus offers me." I was so touched by that sound, and I looked to see where it was coming from and realized that one of my granddaughters had started singing that. And before I could step closer, all 6 of them and my wife joined in, and they sang the entire hymn. And I stood there with tears running down my face, knowing that they had been touched as I had been touched with that kind of an experience. That is the kind of experience that these tours produce for those who go with the intent to learn about the Savior and all of the things that are recorded in the scriptures that have to do with the Holy Land. That's what I love.
You never know either when the Spirit is going to touch you or speak to you. And I think that is such a wonderful, unique, I know there's many hymns that run through my mind when I'm there. That one is almost always a daily occurrence, but what a special experience you had.
And there's so many. As I was thinking about what am I going to talk about with this opportunity, and that's one of the most touching ones. But you never really know. It's like you say, you never really know where you're going to be touched by the Spirit about these places. And
every place, every tree, every rock, every mountain. I mean, it's unbelievable.
So that's what I felt would be the most impactful. I've talked to a number of our group members since we've been home from this trip in March, and all of them have said how grateful they were to be able to have that experience and then come home and celebrate Easter, that the impact has been so much more meaningful this time because of they've had a chance to walk in the footsteps of the Savior, to feel what he felt, to hear the sounds and smell the smells, and to feel the land, because it hasn't changed that much.
No, I think that everybody who goes over, and of course we love our tours, and whatever way people get over there, whether it's on their own, or we've had people go over on business trips, and we love to be able to assist them. Our tours with our special directors like you. I love, like what you had mentioned, that as many times as you've been over, you have crafted a tour with so many wonderful experiences. And I think that it's one of the things that's great is every time you're with a new group, but though it's almost like you have a new tour because it's a whole new personality group that comes in. And where are those teaching moments going to be? And I think one of the most significant things anybody's ever pointed out to me about a tour to Israel, and I didn't realize it until it happened to me, is it's amazing when you're there, but you don't truly feel the experience until you come home and you're studying the scriptures, or you're singing a hymn at church, or you're partaking of the sacrament. And all of a sudden there is an amazing, the Spirit is just so kind, the way that it manifests.
Yeah. I've referred to that many times. In fact, every group that I take to the Holy Land, I inform them that that's what's going to happen to them, that some of their greatest learning experiences are going to come not during the tour, but after it, when the fatigue and these
are not easy tours. You're going from the breakfast to dinner. We're going to make sure that you get everything.
These are not leisure tours. We are on our feet. If you want to experience what the prophets and the Savior experienced, you have to get on your feet. And we do some walking. And I always tell our people to make sure that you have a walking program so that this is not a shock to your system when we are out on the land and experiencing it firsthand. I had an experience that I don't know if I should share it or not, but when I was teaching the students at the Jerusalem Center, we were walking on a dirt path where the Savior must have walked. And some of my students were wearing sandals, and I will never forget it. This one young lady who was walking next to me stopped dead in her tracks, and she looked down at her feet with sandals on, and she said, "Oh, I get it. I understand why they washed their feet." Because her feet were dusty and dirty. And it was one of those realizations she would have never had having not been to the Holy Land. But it was a realization and an understanding and a perspective that came to her. And I've seen that happen 1,000 times with different people, where a discovery is made right on site that they never realized before and wouldn't have without that experience.
Without that experience. Well, I think just finishing Holy Week like we just did, I think it's I know a blessing for me to be able to reflect my time back there, and it does make my observance, I think, a little more special, knowing that I've been to those places. I think that it is something that does change people as they get to go. I love also, you had mentioned the teaching of the Old Testament and learning the Passover and how the Passover has changed into the celebration that we have now of the resurrection. And being in the land of the Old Testament as well as the New Testament, and getting to get that full experience is just a very unique opportunity. So I think it's amazing the things that you get to share with people and the way you get to touch people's life. I think this has definitely been a calling that you were I was going to say prepared to do. This is something that you do so well, and people just love going with you. I will just put out a pitch that you do have a tour going in the fall of 23, as well as the spring of 24 that's available to sell now. Not knowing when people might watch this video, you do always do a tour in the spring or the fall. So I'm going to let you maybe just give us a benefit of maybe the difference between a spring and a fall tour, because personally, I love the fall better. And I don't know if it was because I loved seeing the olive harvest or some of the different things that was going on, or maybe it was just because it was the very first time I was in Israel. It was that time, and maybe that's why I love it. Tell me what you love about both the spring and the fall.
Well, let me start off by saying I've had people ask me that question a lot. When's the best time to go?
When's the best time? When you can go is the answer.
And what I tell them is when you can go, because you're going to experience different things at different seasons. But the most important thing is let's realize that the Savior himself experienced all the seasons there. And it doesn't matter what season you go. You're going to experience what the Savior experienced. And that's one of the reasons for going.
I love that point.
So that's what I tell people.
Well, and then I will just add, the spring is beautiful. We saw that desert picture that you had. Seeing Israel in the bloom of spring and the green fields with the poppies and the blue skies, and it's just breathtaking. And so there is definitely something in all seasons. I've been there during right after Christmas, I should say. And I've been there in the spring and in the fall. I'm a kind of a baby. I've never gone in the summer because I don't know if I could handle that kind of heat, me personally. But people know what you're comfortable with. So I hope that if you are considering a tour to Israel, that you will definitely look at one of our tours. You would have an amazing experience with Brother Judd on one of his tours as well. And Joel, I just really appreciate your time that you spent with us and the presentation that you put together and sharing some of your insight. That Holy Week walkthrough is so meaningful. And again, being able to see from the Mount of Olives that whole path that happened from the time he was taken from the garden to Caiaphas, to Pilate, you can see it all. And, it's amazing when you just don't sing There's a Green Hill Far Away the same way either, when you know that you can stand at one point and see so much. But it's definitely a wonderful experience. Israel is a magical place, and we, again, are grateful that we get to take people there that I get to help people travel there and the experience that you give them while they're there and that education, because that's what is the difference between, as you pointed out, the country is very small. Tours will all see basically the same thing. The way it's presented and the way that it is taught is really the difference in the experience, and of course how you prepare yourself to go. So with that, thank you again for sharing this time with us. Thank you again, Joel, and happy travels, everybody. Our tours can be found on our website at www.mmetours.com. That's MM for Morris Murdock, E for Escorted, and then the word tours with an S, mmetours.com. And make sure to click on the Holy Land link and you'll see all the different options we have available, including Brother Judd. So thank you all again so much. Safe travels and shalom.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks again, Joel.
You bet.